Yeah, I should get my.
All right, we'll get started here in just a second. So with the weather, we decided to make this hybrid. So we are going to be streaming and have it on Zoom. And have people here as well. So we'll also be able to kind of record it. One thing I'll do, this one won't be as interactive as some of the last ones because it's kind of more content going through, but we'll have some time for Q&A. And then I'll be able to hang out a little bit afterwards. But we're going to use something called Poll Everywhere. That if you have a smartphone, you can just kind of answer a question or two, and they'll be able to do that online as well. My students are here, so when we do Poll Everywhere, if you don't want to mess with it, you can just vocalize it and they kind of get your answer in. But if you want to deal with it, I've got some handouts here. You either just go to the web page, or if you know how to do the QR code, you can do the QR code and it'll kind of pull it up automatically. Right? I'll just pass a few of these around. If my students can raise their hand, I got a few of my students here. You know, if you want any help with the technology, they'll be happy to kind of come by and show you how to do it as well.
Okay, I have a smartphone there.
And Liam, I posted the link to the Poll Everywhere. Just repost that again as well. That's just a little bit. If more people come in, yeah, you're gonna see. So, no, that's not any webinar. All right, so we're recording, we're streaming. Okay. So I think we're gonna go ahead and start. We won't do that until in a few minutes, so keep on working on it, but you won't be behind yet. So if you don't know me, my name is Martin Carkson. I'm a communication studies professor here at CSU and the director of the CSU Center for Public Deliberation. This is Scoop. This is an event that we do every third Wednesday of the month, or generally every third Wednesday of the month. It's connected to the Deliberative Journalism Project that I'll talk about briefly in a second. And it's just a chance to come together and kind of talk about local issues. What we often do is we pull something. Colorado Conversations is a weekly question that we put up on the Coloradan, invite people to kind of engage and kind of discuss it. So we tend to kind of pull topics from there and design kind of more of an in-person event. This one's a little bit different. It does stem from a Colorado Conversations because we asked probably mid-December or so, like what can Democrats and Republicans work together on in Larimer County or something like that, right? And that one didn't go so well, not so surprisingly, right? That, you know, kind of polarized, people kind of talking past each other, those type of things. So we decided, hey, you know, what we can do. Originally, we were going to do this in January, and then it got snowed out. Almost got snowed out again today, but didn't have as much snow. To talk a little bit about polarization and kind of share some tools and some skills to depolarize, right? So that's gonna be the focus primarily of our discussion kind of today. So let me share my screen. So kind of quick overview of what we're going to do. I'm going to give a really quick introduction to the Deliberative Journalism Project. I'm assuming a lot of y'all have heard. If you haven't, we've got some resources. We just did a really big community update last Thursday. We got a video of that. We've got a resource page talking about that. We got the website up. So if you're interested in deliberative journalism, this is the first time that you've heard about it. I'll give you those resources in a second. And then one of the things that we'd like to do for each of these events is also kind of have a meet your local journalist session, right? Part of as we try to rebuild trust in journalism and support local journalism, getting to recognize journalists are part of our community. They're here, they're real people. I think it's kind of part of that process. So I'll be introducing Blaine here in a second and give him the floor to talk a little bit about his work with North 40 News. And we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. And then we'll go into the main content of going through these tools for bridging political divides. We should be ending around 7:30. I need to pick up my child pretty close by, about a little bit after 8. So I'll hang around for a while. I brought a lot of my books. We've got some library books that you can kind of check out and some other resources. If you want to hang out afterwards and kind of look about some specific things, some of the things I talk about, if you want to dig deeper into it, I can kind of point you in the right direction. And one thing that we do have here, and we'll post it online too. I just kind of created a 2-page or 2 sides of 1 page resource guide for today's discussion, right? So a lot of the links that I'll talk about and those type of things, you'll be able to kind of follow. I'll also maybe add to this. So if things come up, questions come up, I might kind of add to that. The very bottom of that has the website to get to that electronically. So if you want to go, you can actually QR code it or just type it in. So you want to have access to those. So that's basically all the information I'll be covering today. Kind of gives you links to that, including, I haven't done it yet, but it'll have the link to my PowerPoint and it'll have the link to the video once we have a video, right? So then that'll be just the one place for you to go for all these resources, right? But real quick introduction to the Deliberative Journalism Project. It started fall of 21, so we're a little bit over a year old. It is a collaborative process between a whole bunch of organizations that you see up there. So the Center for Public Deliberation that I direct is kind of the lead organization with it, but started with the Coloradan, the Political Science Department, the Journalism and Media Communication Department at CSU. It got an initial grant to kind of explore how to work together to improve local journalism and to develop what we call deliberative journalism, which is journalism specifically connected to the work that the CPD does, specifically focused on helping us have the tough conversations we need to have to address our shared problems. So really trying to experiment and innovate and see how local journalism can really be this resource to depolarize in some senses, right? So that's the connection to what we're doing today. Right? So you see several of those partners, including one of those partners is North 40 News, which we will kind of go to next. One of the initial links on that handout is the link to the video from last Thursday's update that talks about a lot of the initiatives that we're working on. We got student journalists doing a lot of work. We got a webpage with that. We got the Coloradan Conversations kind of project that we're trying to spark and get more and more attention to. We got some work groups that are forming for people that want to kind of dig into some of these topics. I'm starting one on kind of issues of trust and bias in media. If you want to really kind of dig into that and kind of think about that. So if you're interested in all that, happy to talk about that more. I also have my email on the bottom of that page. Right? But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Blaine here to talk a little bit about it. So we've got about 10 minutes here for him to talk and then take some Q&A to hear a little bit about North 40 News. And I'll actually walk around and deliver these. I don't have my bike with me, but
funny he said that because during the pandemic, I was on my bike tossing newspapers with my kids, and that was actually really fun and really cool to see people coming out of their houses and thanking us for, actually getting the community news out when nobody, could leave their house. Anyway, my name is Blaine Howerton. I'm with North 40 News. I'm the publisher and owner. I've been a journalist for my entire career. I went to CSU, graduated from the journalism department at CSU with a degree in technical journalism back when they had that program going. My specialization is in television. That's most of my career has been in television, working for TV stations all up and down the Rocky Mountain region, from Pueblo to Farmington, New Mexico, up to Salt Lake. And back down in Denver. The last major media organization that I worked for in Denver was Fox 31. I was there for about 12 years and left while I was in management, seeking something different. Number of years later, I actually came up to Fort Collins. My wife at the time had gotten a job at CSU. And so moved the family back up here, and I ran across North 40 News in a pizza shop in Old Town. I hadn't read it in probably 12, 13 years since I had been here. But on that particular edition on the front page was an article from the publisher at the time saying, "I'm done. I can't do it. I'm shutting it down. This is the last edition." And I read that and it just tore my heart out. I mean, even though I hadn't read the publication in a while, it tore my heart out because I knew that it was probably one of the last locally owned publications in this area. Did a little bit of research, and Sure enough, it was. So that night I put a presentation together for him based on what I knew in new media and television and got a hold of him. Never met the guy before, and said, hey, I have something for you. It's about your article. I want you to have it, and I have some ideas. So I took it to him and said, here it is, PowerPoint presentation. This is how I envision you saving this publication. And he said, yeah, well, this is amazing. And I know this will work, but I'm done. I'm retiring. I'm out. You know, he said, I'm looking for somebody to buy the newspaper. And I said, yeah, okay, good luck with that. And he's like, no, like, you don't need to worry about it. Like, I think I want you to buy it. And I was like, definitely not thinking that way. And I said, my experience is in television. I have Adobe Creative Suite, but I am on the other side of the suite, the video side, not the print. I don't even know how to run the print, software. And he's like, I will teach you. And I was like, okay, well, what's wrong with the newspaper? Like, how much debt is it in, legal trouble, like, what's the deal? And there's no debt, here's the deal. I will give you North 40 News because I want it to survive. And at that point I was still very hesitant and I had to think about it, call my business attorney, and all of that. And the bottom line is he gave me North 40 News so it would survive 6 years ago. And he did everything that he said. He taught me how I could transition into print. All my friends said I was nuts. My wife at the time said I was nuts because I was essentially in the journalism world, in their view, going backwards. That print was dying, that it wouldn't exist soon. And I just told them, I feel like it's my duty, something I have to do, no matter what. So my entire career has now been into North 40 News, keeping it alive. Obviously, we've done that. And the exciting part is over the last 5 years, we've transitioned it from being a tiny little newspaper based in Wellington in a coffee shop's closet, to moving it to Fort Collins, taking it from a circulation of 5,000 a month to about 40,000 a month. So you can see what kind of growth, is involved in that. North 40 News is now a weekly. It comes out every week, hopefully on Mondays. The week is good. And I'm really proud of where we've gotten with it. The thing is it's not easy. This is a really hard thing to do on a weekly basis. To pay for this newspaper, it's our biggest expense, even over salaries. And paper is on the rise even more. Our print bill in January alone went up 30%. So how does a local newspaper survive when the biggest bill goes up 30%? And in this paper in particular is a free circulation review. So we're giving it away. You might say, well, the advertising was supplemented. Maybe, depends on the month. So it's a struggle, to be honest with you, every month. And there are months that I eat ramen every night for dinner, so I can, and that's no joke, so I could survive. Yeah. Thank you for the dinner. 20 minutes ago, I was in my yard chopping wood, so I have grocery money. Like literally, this is the hardest work I've ever done in my career. But it's very fulfilling, and I know that it needs to be done. So hoping that this year North 40 News can grow, can get bigger. We're working on some digital initiatives now that would kind of be, I think, supplemental to our revenue. We're also working on diversification of revenue, doing things where this journalism entity will actually get involved in selling things, getting involved in events, maybe getting involved in the nonprofit world. So we are at a crossroads to where this business must be looked at completely different.
Speak a little louder.
Sure, sure. Sorry, I'll try to. do that. I'm a writer now, so. So yeah, I'm just trying really hard to look at it in a different way. And still do what we need to do, and that's journalism. Great content, great local content. So I guess I'll kind of go from there. Are there any questions that you all might have? Ooh, thank you. Yes.
Maybe for a question or two?
Yeah.
Yeah, John?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Blaine, can you tell us about your campaign, or did you already talk about that to get more into sustainable model? I mean, You're reaching out, you've got a group that's meeting and all that.
Yes. Thank you for reading the North Forty News.
Getting a paid subscriber.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. We've got a couple of subscribers. Yes, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, so quite recently, within the last month and a half, I've called on our strongest supporters, our readers, to get involved. And it's a call that happens every Monday that we call the Builder Call. And the idea is to get our community involved in what North Forty News is doing. And it's an open forum. The Zoom or the Google Meet is in the newspaper, printed and published every single week. And anyone is invited. So thank you for doing that, for mentioning that, because anyone in here is absolutely welcome to provide your input, your feedback, you know, ways that we can build a sustainable model, you know, to run the newspaper and keep it alive. The goal isn't to just keep it alive this year or next. I want it to survive for multiple generations. Because this community, not just Fort Collins, but the communities around northern Colorado need it. They need local journalism. And it's very important, not just to me, but to everyone.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate your time coming today. Hopefully get a few more subscribers, or, you know, at least readers that are kind of engaging your work and sharing your work. You know, part of what we're doing, the Deliberative Journalism Project, this is part of the hub. Ginny Fisher's in the room, who's a journalism instructor that we're kind of working with. Part of the event on last Thursday was launching the hub, which is be a local place that we're, you know, focusing on news. We're going to be publishing some of her student journalism that's be focused on local, but then also kind of connecting people to stories from North 40, stories from the radio stations, stories from the Coloradan about local issues. So we're going to try to build that up as kind of a place that you can go to kind of connect to local issues from lots of different perspectives. Okay. All right, so now we're gonna looks like people already started doing this, right? So this is the poll everywhere. We're gonna start with just a question to get some interaction. Again, if you're not on there, you can vocalize it, and I've got my students can kind of add your word to this. We're starting with this question: what word? We'll do one word at a time because it's like a word cloud, right? The more people that say the same word, it gets bigger, right? But you can do multiple words if you got additional adjectives you want to throw out there. But what word would you use to describe how you feel about engaging? I got the little thing in the way there. Or does this question or something? Oh, yeah, they're trying. There we go. About trying to engage across political differences. So you see, frustrated and challenging is winning so far, right? We got uncomfortable, we got discouraged, but we do have some positive, encouraging. It's changing a little bit. So intimidated. Other words that people would throw out there in terms of engaging? Yeah. Educational. Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Important.
Important. Yeah. Necessary. Any others? Yeah. Opportunities, right? We've got a good, I guess the group that self-select to come here, right? They're the ones that, hey, we want to do this. We know it's important. We know it's difficult, right? And we'll kind of get into why that's so difficult and also why that's so important here, right? So I'm going to spend a few minutes here kind of giving big picture. Polarization is a huge academic topic. There's tons of books written on it. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds here, but give it maybe like a 10-minute kind of big picture overview about polarization, why we're polarized, some of those things. And then we'll start getting into the hands-on tools kind of after that for the rest of the meeting, right? So the first question is, how polarized are we, right? These are just some, I did a quick Google search for polarization in America. These are some of the titles: The Doom Spiral of Pernicious Polarization, Poisoning America. This one, I don't know, I'm not too sure about this one. It says 50% of the people answering a poll at least somewhat agreed that we're going to have civil war in the next several years. 3 out of 10 people say political polarization is the number one issue. I'll show you some statistics that we are unfortunately kind of leading the world in polarization in some senses. I am one of the people, and I've said this in other talks, that I do believe political polarization is probably our number one issue, right, for me. And the reason my argument there is, I think it's going to be really hard for us to take on any other issue that we care about, whatever that issue is for you, if we don't deal with this first. Right. My work as a communication professor and a process designer, the polarization just undermines our trust, undermines our ability to talk to each other, undermines information and facts and knowledge, and then just kind of cuts everything out. Right. So my goal is, if we work on that, at least in our local community, we avoid all that, then we can take on all those issues and we can start moving the needle on these critical issues that we care about. Right. But I know in some ways that's controversial, and we'll get a chance to talk about that, because I know some people say polarization is not what we need to focus on. Here's a couple statistics. So this one is Pew. Every 10 years, Pew Research asks people a couple of questions about what you think about people from the other party, right? Would you be willing to let your children marry someone from the other party? Do you see someone at the other party as kind of a threat to the nation's well-being? You see how that's gone up. You might not be able to see it from the back. The first date is 1994, then 2004, then 2014. And you see how much it's increased, right? They're going to be doing this again next year. I wonder where it'll be next year, right? Probably even doubling even more for the last few years that we've had. This is one indication of it. This is a more recent poll. Both Trump supporters and Biden supporters, about almost 90% of them feel if the other person wins, is right before the election, right? That the nation is in grave danger, right? They're very concerned about the direction of the country. That's even kind of on both sides. This is an international one from a report. Polarization. It starts in 1950, ends in 2020. You can guess the one that just took off like crazy at the end. That's the United States, right? That purple number by their measure of polarization. That really the last 15 years we have shot up to dangerous levels, right? So I do a lot of work in this area. I do a lot of work in social psychology, brain science. Many of y'all probably heard me talk about this in some of the other talks. If this is particularly interesting to you, I'm happy to kind of send you deeper videos on this. I'm just going to take a little piece of that talk here. But to answer the question, why are we so polarized, or do we seem so polarized, is setting up an argument I'll make a little bit later. Basically that we're not nearly as polarized as we think, but the perception of polarization is a powerful thing on its own, right? But I see 5 primary drivers on polarization. So one is human nature, and probably the most important. We are unfortunately wired as humans. We're much more wired for polarization than we are for collaboration or deliberation. We like to see the world through particular lenses. And really all the other drivers in many ways are organizations and institutes that unfortunately kind of bring out the worst in human nature, right? So that's the primary driver. Again, this is a slide from a bigger presentation, but these are some of I did a deep dive into social psychology and brain science to really kind of understand how we tick. And I did it from a process design perspective. In a way, a lot of the work in the CPD is we're designing processes specifically designed to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and hopefully tap into the best of it. But these are the negative aspects of human nature that are pretty strong, pretty natural, pretty easy to trigger. That unfortunately a lot of those other things tend to trigger. So we crave certainty and consistency. Our brains are wired that once we make a decision, our brains want to defend that decision and protect that decision and seek out information to confirm that decision. We're suckers for a good versus evil narrative. We are very much narrative creatures of humans. So we think in terms of story. We remember in terms of story. We organize facts in terms of story. And our favorite story is a simple good versus evil narrative with a hero and a victim and a villain. And once we decide who's playing what character, we see the world through that, and we assume the motives. We assume really good motives of our side and really bad motives of the other side. And that's what drives us apart in so many ways. Right? Our brains are really good at getting any new information to fit within that existing narrative, rather than allow it to challenge that narrative. Right? And that's the reality, that facts often don't change minds because of the power of these kind of problematic features. Right? We strongly prefer to gather around the like-minded. We're also, as humans, very social creatures. Jonathan Haidt calls us groupish, right? And he frames it groupish in terms of we're actually not selfish. As humans, we're not individualistic. We're designed to be in teams, to be in groups. There's some good things about that. There's a one book I have called The Power of Us. You can tap into that kind of social thing in positive ways. Unfortunately, you can also really tap into that in negative ways by defining a them and dehumanizing a them and justifying atrocities. Right. One of the books that I've been digging into is one book called Making Monsters, and his newest one's called Less Than Human: Why We Demean, Enslave, and Exterminate Others. It's all based on that basic notion of wanting to be in teams, needing that identity. And sometimes the easiest way to have an identity is to compare it to another, right? So how do we take that on? How do we bring out the positive aspects of that? My initial academic training was in argumentation, how people make arguments and defend arguments and support arguments, and how do you make distinctions between a strong argument and a weak argument. So this fourth one's really important to me because those first three make it really hard for us to think well. Right? We're really good as humans of cherry picking information and finding what we want out of the information and just focusing on what we want to. And that again starts kind of creating a negative feedback loop, gets worse and worse. And then the last one is particularly important to my work. If you heard me talk about wicked problems, but humans are really bad at tensions and dilemmas. Again, we want certainty, we want simple. Most of the tough issues that we're dealing with are wicked, which by my definition is they inherently involve lots of underlying values that don't fit together. We have to make some tough choices. We have to work through some difficult trade-offs. We don't like to do that. And if there's people offering us saying, you don't have to do that, here's a simple solution, it sounds really good, right? So that takes us back to the other drivers. Our political system, particularly our national political system, a two-party system, taps into that us versus them, either or, red team, blue team, right? You have an easy side to hate, an easy side to kind of identify with. The media, hopefully not local media, that's what we're working on, is to make local media a resource, an opposite resource, a deliberative resource to bring us together and help us have those tough conversations. But more broadly, national media, politicized media, they know human nature. They know how to take advantage of it, right? They know that drama sells, that conflict sells, that we want our victims and our villains and our heroes. And they know that if they focus on dilemmas and tensions, people are turning the channel or stopping reading and so forth, right? And then the internet, which is wonderful in so many ways, also unfortunately tends to bring out the worst in us, right? It makes it so easy to gather around like-minded people, so easy to kind of cherry pick information, to pick the worst examples of the other side and send it to all your friends. And then you get the dopamine hits, likes, you get rewarded for simple stories with internet, with social media, right? And you get punished in many ways of trying to do nuance. And then the last one, which is a newer one I'm engaging in, and you'll see some of the tensions in my own talking about this. But it's clear in our political environment, we have bad faith actors. Amanda Ripley, who's a journalist, uses the term conflict entrepreneurs. Another fun term is the outrage industrial complex, right? But the basic idea is there's a lot of people getting really rich and famous, making us angry, taking advantage of human nature, of selling us those simple narratives, right? And unfortunately, that gets incentivized in lots of different ways. The reason I'm conflicted here is I know from the social psychology that our brains want the bad faith actors, right? They want the people we disagree with to just have bad motives, because then we can dismiss them. Right? So the tension there is, I don't like calling people bad faith actors, right? But I also recognize that that's what's happening, right? That they're kind of driving this and driving us apart. Most of those are more national, right? So in a local community, we can kind of control that, but that's one of the things that we have to think about, and that's certainly one of the drivers of taking us apart, is the people that see those four things and see an opportunity. taken advantage of it, unfortunately, some of our loudest voices. All right, almost done with the intro, but I do want to push back on myself here, right? So try to show my own, push back on my own sense of certainty. I've read lots of articles over the years that, explicitly say polarization isn't the problem, right? And particularly making the argument that, if you blame polarization, you're kind of doing this both sides false equivalency, right? You're not able to call out a bad faith actor, or you're not able to. Some people say no, the problem is the other side of the political realm in some ways, and in certain issues, there might be a lot of truth to that, right? So I want to say two things about that. One is, there's reasonable arguments there to say focusing on polarization might be the wrong thing. But the way I focus on polarization, or we're trying to with this project, is not, we're concerned about this toxic polarization, this over exaggeration, right? This division that we have. But when I try to take on polarization, I'm not wanting to flip to this opposite side where everyone's argument is just as good as everyone else, right? And this false sense of harmony, or this false sense of civility of like, hey, let's just, let's not rock the boat, let's not be angry, right? There's a lot of productive ground between those two things, right? So a lot of my work is pushing back, being too far over there on the left side, but it's not because I want to switch to the other side. My focus is a very pragmatic focus that if we deal with polarization, we start having better conversations. And when we have better conversations, that's when facts matter. That's when the quality of your argument matter. That's when values matter. And that's when we actually kind of move forward, right? I've heard, some of y'all have heard this from me before. If the issue truly is bad faith actors and people holding us down, they love the fact that we're all yelling at each other, right? Polarization gives them cover. Polarization is what makes those negative tactics work. But if we take on the polarization and kind of take that out and we start elevating our conversations, then, if you're so sure your side has the best argument, right? In a polarized environment, it doesn't matter you have the best argument, right? Because it doesn't work. It's going to fall flat on the other side. So how do we change those conversations in a very pragmatic way so we can move forward, right? All right, so that's the intro. So now we're going to share a few tools. In a second here, I'm going to stop talking just me so much. I've got parts of a TED Talk that I really like that gives you a good sense of Braver Angels, and just one that kind of digs in some important ways that I'll show. But we got 5 tools that we picked out today to talk about, right? And your resource guide has you links to these. Some of these, most of these are kind of national organizations. Some have the ability to have local chapters that if something excites you, you can explore. Some of these are more hands-on things that you can use that we'll share with you. Quite a few of them, if you look on your resource page, have online trainings coming up, right? So if something sounds interesting, you can jump on. I think 2 of them are on the 23rd. So there's 2, but at different times. So you kind of tap into some of these if you like. I know Willow, the grad student that's working with the CBD, has gone to some of these trainings. Her master's project is kind of focusing on how do these trainings do polarization. So we'll hear a little bit from her here in a second. Right. But the first one I want to talk about is Braver Angels. This is a national organization. This one in particular is really focused on bringing reds and blues together, right? So they're really taking on. A lot of the work of the CBD is like, we just try to avoid party politics, right? We just don't talk about the Democrats and Republicans. Braver Angels takes that on directly, right? They have a lot of cool things. They have workshops, in-person workshops that they sponsor kind of all over the country. They have online debates. They got one coming up that I think I highlighted. That you can kind of have a specific way to do a debate that's kind of much more interesting. That people can have strong opinions, but it's really kind of designed to kind of put more kind of light to something versus just a spectacle debate. And then what we're going to watch here is a talk by Monica Guzman. So Monica Guzman published a book last year, a really good book called I Never Thought of It That Way. Right. She'll tell her story at the beginning of this. I don't need to set it up too much. It's an 18-minute TED Talk, but we'll cut out about 7 minutes in the middle. But you have a link to it if you want to kind of see the whole thing. But I think she does a really nice job of capturing, and then we'll spend some time after this of reacting to this. So as you're listening to this, what do you like? What do you not like? What do you want to push back on? And we'll have a little bit of time to kind of have some discussion as we go there. We had some audio issues showing the video at this point in the event. So we're just going to post the link to Monica Guzman's TED Talk in the comments of this. Really encourage you to watch it if you haven't. We showed basically like the first 7 minutes, the last 5 minutes, skip about 5 or so minutes kind of in the middle. But the entire TED Talk is great to watch. So you can pause this video, watch that TED Talk real quick, and then switch back to this video to see the rest of the presentation. All right, so we've got a few minutes here. Kind of curious reactions to that. Did you buy her argument? You want to push back on parts of her argument? Anything in particular jump out at you as an aha moment? Any turns of phrases?
I used to always. I can't remember her turn of phrase for the end about imagination. See, if you don't, what was it?
Who's underrepresented in your, is overrepresented in your imagination. I got good values and defining them by what they're against. But they're probably not against that, right? Again, that's a similar argument I made if you've seen me talk about wicked problems is the part of the assumption there is in many ways we all have the same values, we just rank them differently. And those rankings matter because individual issues kind of hit different values in different ways. But with bad communication, we misconceive kind of those differences. Any other thoughts or reactions? Yeah.
It reminded me of a conversation I had with a neighbor. He saw me cleaning my driveway and he had noticed that in the past I had political signs in my yard. And I had one from his party. The rest of them were not from his party. He goes, you got one good sign there. And we laughed, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. And he started asking some of those questions, why I did things, and and he said, well, my wife and I are going to pray for you. And I said something off the top of my head that I think I'm going to use again. And I said, I consider that an act of love from you. And I think. And I kind of expected originally that we were going to have a tussle, and we didn't at all.
And that's amazing. And that's part of that us versus them, right? We have so many different ways to connect with each other, and then a lot of ways to differ. And that's part of the bad faith actors are tapping into those things that divide us and trying to kind of get people to focus on that. And that's what a two-party system kind of inherently does, right? There's one story of a friend of mine who runs the Davenport Institute at Pepperdine University, actually ran for Secretary of State in California, did pretty well as a Republican. But he talked about once he was driving down the highway and then someone cut in front of him, right? And his initial reaction was anger. And then he looked at the car and it was a Prius, right? And he starts looking at the bumper stickers and he starts getting kind of madder and madder. And then finally gets to a bumper sticker of this Green Bay Packers. She's like, oh, it's a Packer fan. He's a Packer fan, right? They're not so bad, right? And it's not that we want to disregard the differences to focus. And we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of common ground. A lot of these programs focus on finding the common ground. We're not finding the common ground as the end, right? Finding the common ground is a means to a broader end, right? Like let's make those connections, let's rehumanize each other. Then we can have the tough conversations about our differences and kind of work through those. But we're not just finding common ground for the sake of common ground. Right? That's kind of more of a pragmatic thing. Right? But yeah, so Brave Rangers again really kind of focuses on the red and blues, really does kind of more, it is more of a traditional bridging institution that does see both sides, right? And lots of useful kind of tools and programming that they have both online and kind of face to face, right? Get back to my PowerPoint here. Oh, I know. Restart the share. There we go. We can share. So the next one is the Better Arguments Project, and I guess I should say I'm part of the Scholars Council for Braver Angels. I don't get any funding for them or anything like that, right? But I do connected, and I also was part of the Aspen Institute's Better Argument Project initially, some initial meetings, getting feedback to kind of develop this. So they're doing some interesting work. I have a few copies of one of their main reports if this is something that kind of jumps out to you. Eric Liu, who runs Citizens University up in Seattle, does a lot of really interesting stuff. He has this one program called Civic Saturday, where he's really trying to kind of borrowing from faith institutions of having a gathering, coming together, reading scripture, but more kind of patriotic kind of things, having a speaker, singing songs together. Sabrina Slugowski-Tipton, who's the managing director of the CBD, went through that training. We did a few of those. It was right at the beginning of COVID, right? So we did some online ones, but we might get back to that. That's just a chance for people to come together in a different way and, connect on the us. But Eric has got some great TED Talks about this work. I like it in particular, again, because my background is an argumentation scholar, right? So argument for me, there's always two meanings of argument, right? There's the argument, like we're arguing kind of back and forth, like having a fight. For me, argument is, hey, you're making a claim, right? You're making an argument. And certainly a big part of living together in diverse democracies is us having good arguments and thinking about how do we, listen to each other and hopefully have systems where, better arguments get elevated and bad arguments kind of get exposed. So he makes the claim, it's not that we need less arguments, we just need better arguments. And sometimes he specifically said we need less stupid arguments. So he has some principles on how to make good arguments. I actually went to a program in a library or Kennedy by, I think it was in Thornton, that brought them in to kind of model this, right? So this might be something that the CBD can model at some point, kind of going through. Again, good resources online. This is a new part that I wasn't kind of connected to, so I don't know as much as I was kind of pulling some things. So they have these 3 principles. They talk about 3 principles arguing better, of understanding the historical context, that you do need good information, right? That it can't just be pure opinion, that we need emotional intelligence. That's a key part of what we do at CBD. You need to understand the social psychology and brain science, right? And figure out better ways to help people have this conversation. He does a lot of work on the importance of power, understanding power, and how power can be kind of created in some important ways. So it's not always determinate from a top down. The thing I wanted to focus on primarily is he talked about 5 principles of a better argument to kind of think about how do you have these tough conversations. These are the ones that when they have the meetings, they go through this first and then they kind of give people a topic to kind of dig into. The first one, taking winning off the table, is a critical one, right? Particularly if you're trying to have a conversation. You got that a little bit from Monica Guzman as well. If you're going into a conversation at Thanksgiving with your uncle, with your goal of, convincing him he's wrong and he must change his mind and think like you, you're gonna fail, right? And it's probably gonna backfire and that he's gonna leave even more convinced that he was right from the beginning. But if you take winning off the table, at least for this situation, right? You make the goal of the conversation understanding or exploring each other, kind of making sense of each other, those type of things, then you can actually move the needle sometimes, right? I push back on this a little bit, right? I see it at least in the short term. Eventually, though, we have to make decisions together, right? So you can also sometimes overemphasize completely taking winning off the table as you go through. Prioritize relationships and listen passionately. You'll hear the importance of listening and tools about listening kind of quite a bit tonight and all these different ones. Pay attention to context. Embrace vulnerability. And the notion if you expect the other side to potentially change their mind, you have to be willing to potentially change your mind as well. Right. And normally the human nature is to go in ready to fight, you're sure of your side. Unfortunately, certainty sometimes is persuasive, right? So we kind of urge ourselves to kind of do that. That tends to not work, right? In lots of ways. So there's new research coming out on this, and it's easy for me as a PhD with the privileges I have to say, no, I should be more vulnerable, right? For other identities, embracing vulnerability can be more difficult and not be as effective, unfortunately. And then make room for transform, where you're just kind of opening up those spaces to kind of move together. So really interesting program. They actually have a training in a couple of weeks, just a virtual training for free. People are just to kind of dig in more, but just one of those tools. The next two directly kind of get at the argument I set up a little bit earlier, that we're yes, we're incredibly polarized in some way. It's hard to say we're polarized more than ever that we have had a civil war, right? But if you look at the polls and you look at the mean spiritedness kind of tied to this, it is something different that we've never really had in many ways. At the same time, it's pretty clear that a lot of the polarization is exaggerated. We're not nearly polarized. A lot of it's manufactured. Again, we have a political system that rewards polarizing people as a political strategy, right? So these next two, this is more in common. It's actually an international effort, but they also have some, a lot of resources here in the US that basically does research to try to figure out what do we have in common. I try to push back at least on the exaggerations. They got two reports in particular that are really interesting that I gave you the link to, if this is interesting to you. I think this one may be about 2 or 3 years old, but they did a study of political perspectives, getting beyond just kind of left and right, progressive, conservative. They make the argument that there's 6 tribes. I know you probably can't see that very well from the back of the room. On the left, progressive activists, then traditional liberals, then passive liberals, then politically disengaged, then moderates, traditional conservatives, and then devoted conservatives. And you kind of see the percentages here down on the bottom. Can't see on the very bottom, but basically we feel so polarized, we feel so, but mainly it's because I think the way they have it, these 2 columns and that column are the most active. They're the ones that are speaking the most, active on social media, the dominant kind of voices out there, right? And the phrase they use for basically the middle 4 is this just exhausted majority in some ways. That some have disconnected completely. Right? But really interesting report that really kind of digs into that. They worked on it for a couple of years, really trying to understand these things. This is a newer one. So this is 19, so still a couple of years ago. Or wow, 4 years ago now, right? But this is one specifically, we're seeing more and more examples of this kind of work. Monica Guzman talks about this a little bit in the middle where I skipped, right? Some of this research. Basically what they do is they ask Democrats, what do you think Republicans believe, and vice versa. And then they show how wrong people are, right? That our assumptions about the other side are very exaggerated in the percentages and lots of different things. You're not gonna be able to see this, but just a couple of examples. Again, I'll add the PowerPoint if you want to dig in, or you have a link to the report itself. So this is the gap between Republicans' actual views and Democrats' estimate. This first one is properly controlled immigration can be good for America. Right? So Democrats believe that Republicans don't believe that, and actually, around 85% of Republicans believe that. Right? So a lot of these issues are the gaps. So that's just one chart of the Democrats' perception gap of Republicans, and this is the vice versa, Republicans and Democrats. So then when we actually dig into what we actually believe versus what we think we believe, still certainly some big differences, right? I'm not saying, hey, if we just have a better conversation, everything will just be fine, but much more manageable. We're often kind of making huge assumptions and caricatures of the other side. Very similar project with an organization I worked with for the last 20 years called Public Agenda, great national firm that tries to do, it's kind of a polling firm, but tries to do much more in-depth polling, really talking to people, not just kind of like a survey, answer questions. But they started this project about 3 or 4 years ago. They have several different reports on different issues that they're doing polling in focus groups and discussions. But a big part of that is to try to find the common ground, right? Instead of the typical media move of like highlighting the differences and kind of sparking that interesting thing is like, hey, where on these different issues might we find ways to move forward? Because we're finding points of agreement on tough issues like immigration, like policing, like, a recent one is specifically about journalism, right? So they have these different reports, a nice little, 15, 20-page reports on different issues. But the whole focus is on how can we find ways across perspectives, some key beliefs, some key things that people are interested in that we might be able to move forward on. So really kind of useful resource. Now, the next one, I'm going to pass it over to Willow. Talk about the work that she's been doing with Unify America.
Hello. My name is Willow Paul. I'm the graduate assistant at the Center for Public Deliberation, and I'll be chatting with you all about an organization called Unify America. So Unify America strives to both empower and coach everyday Americans in feeling confident to engage in everyday politics at every level. So local, state, national. And they do this through a 3-phased whole mission. So the first phase is just getting to know your neighbor. So whether it's Joe, the Democrat down the street, or maybe it's Robert, the Republican down the court, just getting to know where people are coming from. So getting to that why in Monica Guzman's TED Talk. So trying to figure out the values and experiences that go into forming why someone holds the beliefs and stances that they do. And then phase 2 really works on building our civic muscles. So this can be done by figuring out how to break confirmation bias, as well as curating our information diet, making sure that it's nice and healthy, because we understand that journalism is hand in hand with healthy democracy. And the last phase of Unify America is going to be getting people together to have conversations and make decisions on the issues that we all face. And this is through citizens' assemblies. But right now, Unify America is in phases 1 and 2. And this is ongoing, open, and free. I reiterate free, if you're interested. It's called the Unify Challenge. And I'm just gonna go over 4 steps to describe what that looks like and how you can sign up if you're interested. So first, you're going to go to Unify's website, and I don't know if you all saw, but on the homepage it says, join the Unify Challenge. You're gonna click that lovely button and you're gonna input all of your personal information. So your name, your leaning, maybe some times and dates that work best for you. They might ask you about a snack, because they do think snacks are also vital for democracy. No one wants a hungry participant. Now, and we'll take questions in a little bit.
Could I ask you to read what's on the board for those of us whose eyes are not too good?
Yeah, no worries. And this will be all available online if you want to take a look. I'm essentially just talking through what each bullet point says. But for the second aspect, all you're going to need is a computer. So this could be a laptop or a desktop. Unfortunately, tablets do not work at this time. And the only other thing that you're going to need is a positive attitude and respect for your fellow participants. So after we get past that second step, we can go ahead and take the challenge to have a conversation. So you will be paired with someone in the United States, a fellow American, but the catch is they're going to have a little bit different political meaning than you do. And you'll sit down on this Zoom link and you'll fill out a survey together. So you will go through specific issues that are happening in America and try to find some common ground in the lens of a goal that we can all agree upon. And after that, we move on to the last step, and in my opinion, the most important step, making sure that you give yourself a pat on the back, because these conversations can be very hard. They can be an emotional roller coaster, especially if you have negative experiences in the past. But that's why organizations like Unify America, like Braver Angels, and like the Center for Public Deliberation exist. We want to make sure that we can have those conversations both honestly and respectfully. And out of participants who complete the Unify America Challenge, 96% of folks agree that we should make sure that all Americans have access to high quality, affordable healthcare. And then 94% of participants agree that along with other countries done legally, we should be a haven for those who are up with a student from another college, and again, who has a little bit different of a political meaning than you do. And that will be going on February 28th, March 1st, and March 2nd. So if you're interested, go ahead and check out the resources table up here and we'll get you set up. So,
Can you talk a little bit about, because the Colorado just Attorney General, right, is kind of pushing kind of this program, and it's linked to the Scalia, I don't know if we got that one yet. Phil Weiser, who's the Attorney General of Colorado, kind of came to campus to talk about it. He's the one that actually introduced us to Unify America, right? Because they're wanting to kind of use some of those kind of tools, and for Colorado to kind of be a hub for this kind of work.
Yeah, so he's one of the partners for Unify America, and there's also a YouTube video. I can update the resources page, and the Attorney General goes over all of.
Question for
Yeah, nice.
different than the braver angel. I'm just curious about.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds
She's the one that's gone through the training.
Yes, so I've gone through the trainings for Braver Angels and Unify America. Braver Angels is going to be more of like giving you tools and techniques to apply to your personal everyday lives with like the folks that you engage with every day. So your family, coworkers, whatever it may be. Unify America is more of let's have the conversation with a stranger. So someone that we know for sure is different politically from us. And we're also working towards a common goal. So we're trying to find a goal for America that we can all agree upon for specific issues. So for example, they cover like education, mental health, the criminal justice system. So you'll go through individual issues and find where that middle ground is. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Awesome.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is it like an online thing or, do you Skype somebody or?
Yes. So currently it is only in online formats. I believe they were wanting to shift towards some in person, but that is not quite in the works. So right now it's just over your laptop or desktop, something with both a webcam and a microphone.
I know the Braver Angels has both virtual and they actually have a lot of local things, right? So you'll see that this is just the skills training workshops from Braver Angels. And they have quite a few different ones, right? So they have one, I think the one that you went through was like polarization within, right? Yeah, but more like individually, how do you kind of depolarize yourself, right? But there's others, and certainly the ones that I know the most I've read examples of and studies of is they have these red and blue workshops where they try to get about 10 people that are Republicans and 10 that are Democrats, and it's kind of all they think. So Monica Guzman's book, and a little bit of that part that we skipped, she talks specifically about a pretty big program that she did in rural Washington state, that she took a bus of about 15 Seattle liberals to a rural community, and I spent a day or two together of just kind of learning to talk to each other, kind of going through it. Monica Guzman's talk, I think one of the reasons it resonates with me is my immigrant parents also happen to be Trump supporters now, right? So it's been helpful for me to kind of learn from her of ways of trying to open up those lines of conversation. Though I'll admit they're not all that open. Okay, this. The Tea Party, right, on the right, and then the person who started Move On, which became a pretty powerful kind of political organization for Democrats in a sense. And it was just realization that polarization is going to tear us apart, and we need to kind of have a tool. This particularly is a tool that you can use by yourself. The whole idea of living room conversations is two friends. Or neighbors or whatever that are willing to tolerate themselves a little bit, that think differently on at least one issue. Right. And then they each invite 2 or 3 friends. So the idea is, you get 6 people in a living room with some coffee and some cookies and so forth, to have a conversation. Right. So they got some YouTube to kind of explain kind of how to do it, pretty simple. But the main thing they have, and I got a few examples over here that I'll pass around. They have discussion guides, about 70 of these. Just grab it. It's just a little 2-page discussion guide. Probably about 70% of it is the same. Hot topic. It has some discussion questions to kind of dig in. And then the third section, the conclusion is just a few questions like, what did you learn, kind of reflections. We actually ran quite a few of these leading up to COVID, for about a year and a half before COVID. We are working with the Partnership for Age-Friendly Communities and working with a high school student from Loveland who started an organization called Generation Connect that was passionate about connecting across generations. So what we did about every other month or so, we had this intergenerational conversation. We would pick one of these topics. If you go to their webpage, it's just livingroomconversations.org, and you hit on topics, and I have a link on the resource page. They now probably have over about 100, right? So here are all these topics that they develop. They do a little bit of research. You know, it has a few paragraphs of setting it up. Sometimes they might have a link to a video to watch beforehand or so forth, but pretty minimal, right? And it's just a set of questions to kind of walk through. We did these again with a mixed audience of high schoolers and over 65. Probably did about 6 or 7 of these, and they were just great conversations. I mean, like, we're hoping to get back now that we're kind of getting somewhat past COVID. We're hoping that we get some funding to kind of start that back up. But again, this is designed for something for you to do in your own living room, right? Just to invite a few people over, and you see a broad range of topics on there. So nice little tool just to give you a little bit of help to have a conversation, so you're not just kind of on your own kind of going through it. Let's switch now to so 2 other quick ones I'm just going to mention. We're not going to dive into the tools. They're kind of more umbrella organizations. So one is the Bridge Alliance. And I'm actually going to go to their website just to show you the reality that there's a lot of people, while we're polarizing, there's also a growing movement of people that realize we need to figure out better ways of talking to each other, right? And then these aren't people that are just neutral, don't have values, right? Again, there's a pragmatic notion to this, like we need to figure out ways to address our issues more productively. So the Bridge Alliance is basically an alliance of organizations. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give you a sense of it, these are all the organizations that are part of the Bridge Alliance. Some of these are national, some of these are kind of more focused local, but these are all kind of a growing model of civic organizations that have some sort of commitment of bringing people together across perspectives to deal with our shared problems much more productively, right? And it keeps on about halfway through there, which is that list of organizations. So going to the Bridge Alliance, you get connected to other organizations that are doing that. By people, right? You know, it's just people passionate about community, passionate about democracy, passionate about solving problems, but realizing yelling at each other doesn't seem to work very well, right? So a lot of them have passionate political beliefs on different sides of the issue, and for NCD, probably primarily progressives. They've always struggled kind of getting more conservatives involved, right? But it's just a whole collection. A lot of them are professionals that have organizations. A lot of them are volunteers. And a lot of them are kind of academics in different kind of levels. But it's by far my favorite conference. They used to do it every other year. It's been canceled by COVID for a couple of years, and it's going to be back. So in October in Atlanta, I'm hoping to take about 20-25 students to go. But if you want to visit Atlanta and you want to meet lots of people doing really, really interesting work, they have great skills shop. It's about a 3-day kind of conference. Oh, because I'm doing NCCD. There we go. But they also have a wonderful web page with lots of different resources. This is one of their meetings, and their resource page I'll pull up because in the picture is Sabrina Savowski on the left, and right behind me is me. Most of their pictures, every one of their conferences, we take 20 or 25 of our students that kind of spread around. So most of their pictures are CSU students in the variety of the pictures. They have a great beginner's guide. They have a great resource guide of a lot of just more the process stuff. How do you kind of engage people? How do you learn those skills? And then if you're a YouTube person, they have their own YouTube channel with lots of different content on how to do this work. All right. that will connect to a lot of these things that we have here. I did cut and paste this chart onto the back of the resource guide, so if it's too hard to see it up here, you do have that in front of you. But these are just some final thoughts that I had as we kind of think about building the skills that we need to address these divides, to address polarization, to come together to deal with our issues. And I kind of divide it here both in terms of like the individual, what you can do as an individual, the individual skills you have, you need to have in the community. And the point that I have here, an appeal for the critical importance of both, is recognizing just you individually changing how you engage with people is not going to be enough, right? We have a hyper polarized environment. And if you within that environment, are the one that's wanting to listen and kind of engage, you're going to kind of get run over, right? So we need more and more people to have the skill sets across talking across difference, but you also need to work together. Conversations, you kind of be that resource. So I'll just do these quick and just open it up conversation. So the first is develop more intellectual humility and curiosity. The more there's assuming you already have some, right? Maybe some of y'all more than others, but to work against how your brain is wired, right? To recognize your brain, wants certainty, wants simplicity, and push back on that, right? And learn kind of how to ask questions and challenge yourself, learn how to have a better information diet, right? Seek out information that might challenge you, and that curiosity. Monica Guzman focuses on curiosity a lot. I have a couple other books about curiosity. It's becoming kind of a really interesting kind of research, academic kind of research area of how do we kind of tap into that. One book by Adam Grant, Think Again, is a great book. He's got some good TED Talks too. He's a great writer that, for more kind of a popular audience. Retrain your brain to think again and kind of question some of the assumptions you have. Build up your skills for listening and asking questions. We talk about this a lot about if you think about your educational career starting in kindergarten, and if you did any higher ed and so forth, how many classes that you took that were about expressing yourself, right? Whether a presentation or writing or dance or whatever, right? We're constantly told how to communicate out. How many classes have you taken now? Are huge skills that democracy needs. So how do you build those up? Some of the books I have are certainly kind of focused on that. Focus on elevating the conversation, not just winning the argument. You've heard that in different ways, right? But your role, we need more and more people that are pseudo facilitators, right? That part of their job, when you're having an argument, when you're at a public meeting, when you're dealing with an issue, your only goal isn't to win, to convince people that you have the solution. More and more, hopefully your goal is to help people have a better conversation, to listen to each other, to help bring people together. The leadership skill we most need in the 21st century is the ability to bring people together across perspectives. So how do we start building that? And how do we identify leaders that have that and elect them? And then last, seek out common ground, but also learn how to kind of identify and work through tensions. That last part of our brains don't want tensions. Most of our issues deal with that. Learning how to deal with tensions and dilemmas. It's a lot of my work. I got several books there about kind of identifying polarities and working through that and seeing the world as tensions to negotiate and how that opens up space for us to have better conversations. And on the community side, this is pretty broad, but overall, how do we build capacity for better conversations? There's a lot of capacity already for bad conversations. There's a lot of support for that. I always, every election, I look at how many millions and millions and millions of dollars were spent on the election, right? For ads and so forth on this kind of adversarial political system. And certainly there's good reasons for some of that. So, but I always like, man, if these organizations that I just shared with you had like 1% of that funding, right? How much of an impact they make? How much could we kind of change how we talk about some of these tough issues? So support bridging institutions, organizations designed to bring people together. We actually started with North 40 and we kind of end with North 40. I wrote an article that I have copies up here for North 40 about a year or so ago about the importance of bridging institutions. At the time, I was working with the Community Foundation in Northern Colorado that sees themselves as a convener, as a bridging institution. I do a lot of work with PAFC, which I think is a great example of a bridging institution, bringing people together to really focus on that issue. PAFC and a partnership for age friendly communities. We need places to gather across perspectives and have discussions. We have the advantage in a local community of proximity that we can be real people talking to each other. Right. So how do we build up those chances for people to have conversations across difference? And then obviously with the work that we're doing, engage and champion quality local journalism, particularly with what we're trying to do with the Deliver Journalism Project. That sees itself as a bridging institution, sees itself as trying to build up the skills and create forums. The Colorado Conversation, we're trying to build this up as a civic space, a place online for us to go to have tough, important conversations about local issues. Supporting the journalism, supporting North 40 News, supporting our public radio stations, and build up that civic society that we've lost in so many different ways. Right. But we have the power to support and kind of build that up. So with that, we got still a few minutes here for any additional questions. At 7:30, I'm going to let you know if you kind of want to honor your time. But again, I'll hang around till at least 8, talking about some of these resources and any other things people want to kind of dig into. Yeah.
You do this every third Wednesday. Here.
Yeah, so the scoop is generally every third Wednesday, right? I think we skipped December because it's December, right? But yeah, we try to pick a topic. So I think we started in October or so like that. So I think this is our 4th one or so. And it's everything. Often we know this is a little bit more presentation than the other ones. Normally we do a lot of kind of discussion, and we actually do this fun thing where we lay out the room. So we have like tape on the ground, like strongly agree, no opinion, and people stand where they, so we'll ask a question, people have to stand. And but today, since we have a hybrid of people online and so much content, we didn't get y'all moving around as much. But we did one on housing, we did one on journalism, we did what was the first? Well, first one was housing, right? Yeah, we did one focus on ranked choice voting right before the election, the city election with that. So yeah, we'll just pick an issue often coming from the Colorado Conversations. Potentially, if there's a particularly rich conversation online, then we kind of pull some ideas from that and try to do something interactive here face to face. We don't normally stream, we just did that because of the weather, knowing that some people might not want to come out. And since this was more content based, but if that worked, we might still try to do that somewhat.
You have to sign up to come. I know I have to sign up.
Yeah, we do have an RSVP, there's not a huge room, right? So to kind of ensure your space, but it's not like we check RSVPs as you're walking in, right? So you're welcome to come, but just so we have an idea of how many are coming, and if we have space, we can keep on publicizing it, right? If it's getting pretty close to full, then we don't do as much. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you incorporated anything from, I believe there was a series of books called Nonviolent Communication?
Yeah.
And I think they were teaching it at Naropa for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, so I probably should repeat the question for the people online. So asking if we've incorporated nonviolent communication. I've had a little bit of exposure to that. It's certainly something we teach in communication studies classes. So probably indirectly I've used some of that stuff. I don't think I specifically kind of dig into it, right? That's one of those things I should probably kind of get back to, but certainly within that broader class of the skills that we're talking about and building that up. I know conflict management classes will typically, Rosenberg, I think, is the main, is the main kind of author that does a lot of work on nonviolent communication. Yeah, Commissioner Faust. Yeah, your hand is there, right? Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about listening? One of the things that I've learned, I've been exposed to is this idea of compassionate listening, listening from the heart. And one of the foundations of that is to do our best to set aside our biases. I wonder if you could speak about any tips on setting aside our biases so we can listen with curiosity and listen in a compassionate way.
Yeah, thank you. So asking a question about, talk a little bit more about listening and some different kind of forms of listening. You know, we had we hired a professor about 4 or 5 years ago to help with a CPD, who's a listening expert. She actually does, tons of research on listening across cultures and different cultures. And so she would give these great talks. Unfortunately, School of Mines hired her away. So she's up at the School of Mines. She wanted to get back to the mountains. She was a mountain girl. So got out there. But she's done some, so training our students to think about this. If you've been to a CPD event, we have a basic set of ground rules that we use in CPD. And one of them is listen to understand, right? And we have another one that's related, which it's okay to disagree, but do so with curiosity, not hostility. And for me, it goes back to that pragmatism. If you're really trying to convince someone that they're wrong, right? Not listening to them and telling them how they're wrong doesn't work. I can tell you for sure from the research, right? But actually listening to them, seeing what they think is important, taking that seriously, paraphrasing, repeating what you're hearing from them and giving them that respect. Another big aspect of human nature that I don't have listed on there is this concept of reciprocity. Humans very much, if you do so, people want to kind of pay that back. So if someone is really listening to you, you're going to want to listen to them, and it kind of creates a different environment. And we certainly see that, part of the design of CPD is the students are trained to be pretty good listeners, right? So at least you have one person at the table that their job is to really listen and to paraphrase and to make sure they understand and ask good follow-up questions. But the really cool thing about watching these events with CPD and having conversations with my students is how quickly the other participants pick up those skills. Right. Maybe the first 30 minutes, the student's the one doing the follow, but then by the end of it, the participants are doing that. Tell me a little bit more about that. Why is that so important to you? So that notion of trying to listen to understand versus listen for the flaw, right? Or there's one quote from a New York governor I've used for years of like, listening in the United States is a competitive exercise in which the first person to take a breath is deemed the listener. Right. So we're just listening, waiting for them to breathe so we can take over. Right. And that might make you feel better about yourself. Your friend that agrees with you might kind of cheer you on. You're not doing much. Right. So, yes, they might be wrong, but if you actually want to move the needle and change their perspective, you have to listen to them, take them seriously to open up that space. The research shows facts don't change minds when we're polarized. What changes minds is a genuine conversation with someone that you develop some sort of trust and relationship with. So that's what we need to do more and more is provide opportunities for us to have those kind of conversations. And that's what's going to move the needle on issues. That's when people are going to have their aha moments and have the shift in thinking. Right. Another question or two? Yeah.
I don't have a question. I just going to comment on the TED talk about how one thing that stuck with me, and I've been thinking about the whole time, is what was the basis of my beliefs, my political beliefs and the foundation of that. And I'm going back in my history thinking, where are some of the stuff that I believe in start,
Right.
and then, and I like a rusted bolt that I can't take loose and hear the other side, or can I not, be persuaded to change my beliefs,
Oh.
in my belief. It's interesting. I thought that was a really good thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the things we train our students, right? When someone has a strong position on something, tell us a little bit more. How did you arrive at that, right? Because normally when you hear that backstory, my argument, I've been doing this for 20 years on some tough issues. Most people are pretty reasonable when you give them kind of a pretty good situation and environment, right? So as polarized as we are, as angry as we are kind of online and so forth, right? I always tell my students when we're training them, the new students, we've got 700 new students kind of in the room, they're a little bit nervous about like, what happens if someone gets really angry or starts screaming or so forth? We just figured it out because I was putting everything together for my report. The CPD has run 503 events, right, since 2006. Normally what we do is, I have lots of students that are trained, so 100 people show up and we split them up into small groups and we have 2 students at every table. I'm never at a table because I need to be walking around and I do the large group kind of stuff. And if someone starts screaming at one of my students, then I'll walk over there, right? And I just kind of walk around and just make eye contact, right? So I can tell if the student is like, don't leave, let's stay here for a little bit. I've literally had to step in to help a student like 3 times in 500 events. Because when you put, you have the ground rules, you have the environment, you have all the bells and whistles that we do, creating an environment. Most people can have those tough conversations, right? And I think that's gonna lead to a lot more people changing their minds and us finding better ways of doing things, right? Versus the alternative. Yeah.
Got a question online.
Okay.
Is there a way to make a career out of this that pays enough to live?
Is there a way to make a career out of this that pays enough to live? Yes, right? And I certainly have, former students who have, are working for different, Colorado Civic Canopy is an organization in Denver that does this kind of work that one of my students is one of the former students is kind of working over there. More and more universities, if you want to get a PhD, you can go the route I did. It took a while, right? Did schooling for quite a bit. But yeah, there's more and more recognition from organizations of the importance of facilitation and having a process person who's designed to do that. We did it for free for the CBD for the first 10 years or so. It was just one class that I was teaching. It got so big, we got asked to do so many things that we finally switched to a fee for service model because we needed, we have one full-time staff person now. And people have been hiring the CBD, right? So there's more and more recognition of having a professional that helps you have this conversation. It's part of it. So that's kind of creating career paths. One thing I'm hoping to do long-term, every city, every county, every school district has communication specialists. Most of those are trained as PR specialists. They're trained in messaging, right? They're not trained in process. They're not trained in how to bring people together. I think the next generation of that position is going to be, that needs both skill sets. They need the PR, but they also need the public participation, the engagement, the conflict management. So that some of the work I'm doing with the CSU's NPPA program, it's kind of, how do we build that up in a way? So yeah, and NCDD has one of their listservs for like jobs, like people. There are lots of people that volunteer to do this, and so it is a little bit harder to have a full-time career with it. But I think we're seeing that more and more. Yeah.
Well, mediation, professional mediator.
Yep. Yeah. When first time I went to NCDD, it was funny because so there's me like a recovering academic, right? That didn't want to just write papers for other academics. I wanted to do something. So I was there. You had a lot of like recovering lawyers, right? That realized the adversarial model and their community mediation was much more interesting. You actually had a lot of recovering activists, right? I had one in particular that I talked to that I think she had a heart attack at 51, and she was like, I can't be this angry the rest of my life, right? So she kind of focused on so it's an occupation and lots of people are kind of reinventing themselves and finding ways to do that. All right, we are after 7:30, so I do want to kind of officially close it to honor people's time. But again, I'll hang around. These first two tables are my books, so please don't just take those. The first table are library books, so you can check them out for free. So you can grab some of those. But I'm happy to kind of tell you about these books and exactly what I do, take pictures of books and digging in. I can't say I've read every single one of them, but I've read most of them, and the other ones I'm hoping to read soon. Right? So thank you again for your time, and I hope to see you again at our student events.
One quick question, what does CDC stand for?